Welcome to Xi Jinping briefing. The content of the briefing includes: other leaders are corrupt, Li Keqiang mourning poses challenge for Beijing. Differing U.S. and Chinese objectives will limit Xi-Biden meeting outcomes. The state of U.S. politics today should warm Beijing's heart. Remains of former Chinese Premier Li Keqiang to be cremated and flags to be lowered. California's Newsom plays hardball in China, collides with student during schoolyard basketball game. Other leaders are corrupt, Li Keqiang mourning poses challenge for Beijing. Financial Times. Hundreds of mourners have paid their respects to the late Chinese politician Li Keqiang, who was seen as the people's premier. The outpouring of grief presents a challenge for Chinese President Xi Jinping, who had largely sidelined Li during his time in office. Li, a reformist politician who advocated for market-oriented reform and anti-poverty programs, was once seen as a possible contender for president but was gradually sidelined by Xi. The public mourning for Li comes at a sensitive time for the ruling Communist Party as it deals with economic challenges and geopolitical tensions. Differing U.S. and Chinese objectives will limit Xi-Biden meeting outcomes. South China Morning Post. China and the U.S. both seek to stabilize their relationship, but each brings a different lens to an expected meeting between Presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping in November, according to Australia's envoy to the U.S. Ambassador Kevin Rudd told a panel hosted by the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington on Monday the difference in expectations would lead to, at best, modest outcomes. China's interest was in more trade, more investment, or access to capital markets to relieve its internal economic tension, while the U.S. was seeking to de-risk economically from China and reduce the risk of conflict through resumed military dialogue. The state of U.S. politics today should warm Beijing's heart. South China Morning Post. The Republican Party's embrace of might makes right governance and the influence of former President Donald Trump is putting the party's traditional values at risk, according to an op-ed in the South China Morning Post. The article argues that the elevation of Representative Mike Johnson, a staunch Trump supporter, to a leadership position in the party demonstrates that ideology matters less than loyalty to Trump. The author suggests that the Republican Party's alignment with Beijing and Moscow, as well as its emphasis on fundamentalist religious doctrine, puts it more in line with autocratic regimes than with traditional Republican values. Remains of former Chinese Premier Li Keqiang to be cremated and flags to be lowered. Associated Press. The remains of former Chinese Premier Li Keqiang are set to be cremated on Thursday, with flags across the country flown at half-staff to mourn his passing. Li, who died of a heart attack at the age of 68, was seen by some as a potential top leader but was sidelined in a leadership shakeup last year. His death is viewed by many as symbolic of the shift towards stronger party controls in China. Li received less attention from state media outlets than President Xi Jinping, and the two never formed a strong partnership. Flags will be lowered at government offices worldwide to honor Li. California's Newsom plays hardball in China, collides with student during schoolyard basketball game. Associated Press. Politicians have long sought to project a common touch by posing for photographs of them playing sports. However, California Governor Gavin Newsom found that his attempt to join a group of Beijing schoolchildren for a game of basketball during an official trip to China backfired when he knocked a grade school defender to the ground. The incident prompted numerous online comments. Business highlights: UAW announces deal with GM, resilient U.S. consumers. Associated Press. The United Auto Workers, UAW, union has reached a tentative contract with General Motors, GM, ending the strikes against Detroit automakers. The GM deal comes after tentative agreements were reached with Ford and Stellantis. Under the deal, workers at all three companies will return to work pending votes on ratifying the contracts. The main provisions of the contracts are largely the same, but there are small differences. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers continue to spend despite high prices and a gloomy economic outlook. Consumer spending rose by 0.4% in September, even after adjusting for inflation. Economists caution that such vigorous spending is unlikely to continue in the coming months as households dip into savings or turn to credit cards. President Joe Biden has signed an executive order to guide the development of artificial intelligence, AI. The executive order requires the industry to develop safety and security standards and introduces new consumer protections. Leading AI developers will also be required to share safety test results and other information with the government. Scott Morrison warns PM China could take advantage of his visit. The Sydney Morning Herald. Former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has warned his successor, Anthony Albanese, that the Chinese Communist Party could exploit his visit to Beijing for propaganda purposes. Morrison said that while Albanese may have good intentions, he cannot control how the Chinese Communist Party will use his visit and the images from it. Relations between Australia and China reached a low point under Morrison's leadership, with Beijing refusing to take calls from Australian officials and leaders. She urges women to have more babies as China battles record low birth rate. Telegraph. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called on women to create a new trend of family in response to a fall in birth rates and concerns over the impact of an aging population on economic growth. Last year, the number of births in China fell by 10% to 9.56 million, the lowest level since records began in 1949. The country's population also fell for the first time in 6 decades to 1.41 billion people. The decline is attributed in part to the former one-child policy, but factors such as high childcare and education costs, unemployment and gender discrimination are also said to be behind low birth rates. China's billionaires looking to move their cash and themselves out. The Guardian. China's wealthiest individuals are seeking to move their money and themselves out of the country, as political pressure and crackdowns on financiers increase. China has long had regulations in place to limit the outflow of capital, but wealthy individuals have managed to find official and unofficial ways to shift their funds overseas. However, recent arrests of individuals involved in facilitating illegal foreign exchange transactions have disrupted these practices. Additionally, wealthy Chinese are increasingly looking to move themselves out of the country, with an estimated 13,500 high-net-worth individuals expected to leave in 2023. The political environment in China has become more restrictive under President Xi Jinping, who has sought to tighten control over the country's wealth and business elites. The recent arrests of prominent figures, such as Evergrande founder Hui Keqiang and investment banker Bao Fan, have further increased concerns among the wealthy class. As a result, wealthy Chinese are looking to countries such as Singapore as potential destinations for their money and themselves. Chinese minister invited to AI summit helped to create cyborg rats. Telegraph. Wu Jiahui, a Chinese vice minister of science and technology, was part of a team that boosted rats' problem-solving skills by implanting electrodes into their brains. The experiment, published in 2016, found that the rats' maze-solving abilities improved when they were guided by a computer algorithm via electrodes. The experiment's success led the authors to suggest that the cyborg rats could be used in search and rescue operations. Wu is expected to attend a UK conference on artificial intelligence later this week, prompting criticism from China hawks who claim he is implicated in human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the sixth dimension. Today, we have a diverse range of news to discuss, from the mourning of former Chinese politician Li Keqiang to the potential outcomes of the meeting between Presidents Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. We'll also delve into the state of U.S. politics, the U.S.-China relationship, and the challenges faced by Chinese billionaires. But first, let me introduce myself as the witty and whimsical guide to the world of news. Now, let's dive into the news. The mourning for Li Keqiang, the people's premier, poses a challenge for President Xi Jinping, who had sidelined Li during his time in office. This outpouring of grief comes at a sensitive time for the ruling Communist Party, as they navigate economic challenges and geopolitical tensions. It's a reminder that even in the corridors of power, personal relationships and public sentiment matter. Speaking of relationships, the upcoming meeting between Presidents Biden and Xi is expected to yield only modest outcomes due to differing objectives. China is looking for more trade, investment, and access to capital markets, while the U.S. seeks to de-risk economically from China and reduce the risk of conflict. It seems like they're playing a game of chess with different strategies in mind. Meanwhile, the state of U.S. politics seems to be warming Beijing's heart, according to an op-ed. The Republican Party's alignment with Beijing and Moscow, along with its emphasis on fundamentalist religious doctrine, is seen as a departure from traditional Republican values. It's like they're taking a detour through the autocratic regime lane instead of sticking to their principles. In other news, the remains of former Premier Li Keqiang will be cremated, symbolizing the shift towards stronger party controls in China. Li's death highlights the diminishing role of reformist politicians in the country. It's a reminder that power dynamics can sometimes lead to sidelining valuable voices. Moving on to lighter news, California Governor Gavin Newsom's attempt to play basketball with Beijing schoolchildren didn't go quite as planned. He accidentally knocked a grade school defender to the ground, prompting a wave of online comments. It just goes to show that sports can be a great equalizer, even when things get a little rough. Shifting gears to the business world, the United Auto Workers Union has reached a tentative contract with General Motors, ending the strikes against Detroit automakers. On the consumer front, U.S. households continue to spend despite economic uncertainties. But economists warn that this vigorous spending might not be sustainable in the long run. So, let's enjoy it while we can, folks. Now, let's talk about China's relationship with Australia. Former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has warned his successor, Anthony Albanese, about the potential exploitation of his visit to Beijing by the Chinese Communist Party for propaganda purposes. It's like telling your friend to watch out for hidden cameras during a reality TV show. You never know how your words and actions will be used. In a bid to combat the record low birth rate, Chinese President Xi Jinping is urging women to have more babies. The decline in birth rates and the aging population pose concerns for China's economic growth. It's like a national call to action to keep the population ticking and the economy booming. But let's not forget the other factors at play, such as high childcare costs and gender discrimination. It's a complex issue that requires a holistic approach. Finally, let's talk about the challenges faced by China's billionaires. As political pressure and crackdowns on financiers increase, wealthy individuals are looking to move their money and themselves out of the country. The political environment under President Xi Jinping has become more restrictive, causing concern among the wealthy class. It's like a game of hide and seek with their fortunes, as they search for safe havens abroad. And there you have it, folks. A whirlwind tour of the latest news from the sixth dimension. Now it's time for you, my dear viewers, to share your thoughts and questions. What do you make of the challenges faced by President Xi Jinping? How do you see the US-China relationship evolving? And what are your thoughts on the migration of China's billionaires? Let's keep the discussion lively and engaging. I can't wait to hear from you. Dr. Six, signing off from the sixth dimension. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.